This program is brought to you by FreeKeene.com. FreeKeene.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. FreeKeene.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. FreeKeene.com.
Hi, this is Taryn Lupo. Welcome to Low Country Liberty Report. For a portion of my life, I actually spent it in the state of West Virginia, right in the middle of Appalachia, out in the mountains. I really enjoyed that lifestyle, and I used to go there also as a kid to go camping, like summer camp, and hiking. A lot of people kind of give hillbillies or hill folk or rednecks a bad name, but I think we need to also stop for a sec and look and cut through the mist that they're some of the most fiercely independent and most defiant to outside control group of people you'll ever find. I'm going to give you a little bit of history about them and let you know why I think they're my heroes. Welcome to Appalachia. If you don't know where Appalachia is, it's a mountain range, basically where the Appalachians are, but it's a general term for this area in white here. And if you're from a different country, this is on the eastern seaboard. All that was really out there were American Indians in a very harsh mountain environment and wilderness. The Scotch-Irish started coming over and landing in Pennsylvania in the south, and they weren't welcome when they got there. And they basically were pushed out to the backwoods in the mountains. They become very, very extremely rugged and independent, and they had a history of ruggedness and independence anyway, so it suited them. But what really did it was they were fighting Indians constantly, and they adapted and actually worked with the Indians some, became masters of the wilderness out there, and after about 20 years, they were just fantastic at living off the land. They came over because they wanted to escape their country. I mean, it had been for centuries out of control with corrupt governments and wars, nonstop, invasions and poor crops. And once the first settlers came over, Scott and Irish started really coming over in droves. Bringing with them was their resistance and defiant attitude toward authority. They were always defying governments that tried to occupy them. They also brought their traditions with them, which included a distillery equipment. The Southern Mountains quickly changed their rum-based local economy over to a whiskey-based because of the Scots. So right off the bat, the Scottish are using whiskey for enjoyment, medicine, and even currency. And everything was fine until the Whiskey Rebellion. So what happens is they fight this revolution, and to remove themselves from British taxation, the first thing Washington does when he gets in power is to turn around and tax whiskey distillers. And it just infuriated people. So Washington lays down this tax. The distillers in Pennsylvania and the Appalachian region don't want to pay it and ignore it, and Washington musters troops and goes in and marches on these whiskey distillers, and there's a huge riot and people get shot and killed. It's a mess, but the government uses force immediately to collect taxes of this new nation. So even though the tax later gets repealed in 1802, the Appalachian folk never forget this, and they never trust the new government again. Well, they start brewing again immediately. They really never stopped. But in 1862, Lincoln comes along, and he's trying to fund the Civil War and puts a heavy tax on them again, sends in armed federal agents, and they come and destroy and imprison and kill distillers who won't pay. And even after the war ends, they, of course, keep the tax in place. They refuse to lift it, and they increase their efforts to collect. So from 1887 to 1891, the feds come in and destroy 5,000 stills and make 8,000 arrests. Well, the moonshiners retaliate against all these raids by going underground and closing their ranks. Because of their heavily Scottish and Irish heritage, they're used to a clan structure. And they have families protect each other, and their neighbors protect each other. There's pretty much the first Americans who openly defy the federal government
by peaceful non-cooperation, basically because no one would talk to the cops or feds, and whenever they came into town, they made them feel very unwelcome. This defense worked, and the feds had a harder and harder time locating and destroying stills. Then, in 1920, Prohibition hits, and prices for alcohol skyrocket, and profit margins skyrocket, and these distillers are already in place and seasoned. So for 13 years, Appalachia saw fantastic profits. On a side note, bootleggers start running liquor up from Atlanta, which later on becomes NASCAR because of the Falk brothers, right down Thunder Road towards Dawsonville. Just on an interesting southern side note, how NASCAR got started was because of Prohibition. Sadly, though, once Prohibition's repealed, all that profit goes away, and they have to figure out a new source of profit because there's so many distillers, no one's making any money anymore. So they start growing marijuana out in the country. Now, Appalachia is fantastic for growing marijuana because of its soil. And they start developing the best crops the planet's ever seen. Their, plants are 12 to 15 feet high. The leaves are the size of your hand. They have double the THC as plants coming from California, Mexico, and South America. And they get very, very good at growing it. Again, they use the clan system to serve them well, and nobody talks to the law. Well, the growers got smart later on and stopped planting on their own property. As an act of defiance and self-preservation, they planted crops on huge amounts of parks and public land and government-claimed property, and they hide it on government land. They would plant in real hard-to-get and private locations and disguise it, and they would come up and harvest it in September. It became way too risky to grow at your own farm or your home because the new laws were in place that allows DEA agents to come in and steal anyone's house and all their assets if drugs are found at their home. So the hill folks adapted, and they moved their drug growing away from their home and put it up on public land that, quote, everybody owns. So it can't be directly traced to them. One of the most prolific and largest examples of this is the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. Every year there's huge raids in September, and they really only get just a portion of all the pot that's grown up on those hills. One part of this that I'm unclear on, and I'm not sure where I stand, is it okay to use violence against the DEA if they're destroying or taking your property? I mean, these drugs should not be illegal. These are unjust laws. And what's going on is the hill folk consider it their property. It's like coming in and destroying their crops or their house or taking their cash. And so they're defending themselves by booby-trapping their crop fields. I feel both ways on this because I do think that you are allowed to use violence to protect yourself and property, but I also feel bad that these guys are getting killed and maimed. The real easy solution is to stop the war on drugs, and then you wouldn't have officers getting killed and maimed, and people on the other side of the drug war would also be left alone. Now, I basically call these guys heroes because they're standing up against unjust laws at great personal risk. Despite where you come down on the war on drugs, one issue remains that's very, very important. It's the ultimate question of property rights. Do you own your body, or does the government own your body? Do you get to decide what goes in your body, or does the government get to decide what goes in your body? And these guys are just making a profit, outright defying the laws out there, and I think that takes a lot of courage. One thing's for sure is the war against any kind of prohibition is always way worse than what you're trying to protect them from. Worse than alcohol, drugs, or hard drugs. Believe it or not, the war on people is much worse because you're taking brothers, sisters, mothers and fathers and stuffing them in a cage, and that's somehow supposed to make society better because they had a plant. It makes no sense. So if you have a little of that hill folk attitude and don't like being told what to do and are peaceful and just want to be left alone and let others live their lives, you might want to check out something